It's not just a crusade against Mr. Bundy. What it is a crusade against this ever happening again.
Anti-government activist and former candidate for governor, Ammon Bundy, has been absolutely absent in dealing with a lawsuit against him. But lately, and this week, Bundy has been very present, at least online. We talked about this defamation lawsuit earlier this week, the one filed nearly a year ago by St. Luke's Health System against Bundy and his friend Diego Rodriguez. On Tuesday, attorneys for St. Luke's filed a motion in the state's highest court to get the Gem County Sheriff to serve Bundy legal papers, something Sheriff Donnie Wonder decided was too dangerous to do anymore. Last week, Sheriff Wonder wrote a letter saying Bundy was being confrontational and he wasn't willing to risk the safety of his deputies over a civil case. Well, after St. Luke's went to the state Supreme Court, Sheriff Wonder had a change of heart yesterday, writing another letter saying he'd had further discussions with prosecutors, with St. Luke's and their attorneys, so he will once again abide by his statutory duties. Today, St. Luke's attorneys pulled their motion, called a writ of mandamus, since the sheriff agreed to do his job, which is required under Idaho code. This whole thing began when Bundy and Rodriguez organized a days-long protest outside St. Luke's in Boise last March. The protest, you may remember, was over the removal of a child from his parents, baby Cyrus, after Health and Welfare determined that boy was malnourished and in, quote, imminent danger. The morning after the infant was hospitalized at St. Luke's Meridian on March 12th, Bundy was arrested for trespassing because he refused to leave that hospital. Bundy and his People's Rights Network then organized several days of protests at St. Luke's in Boise, claiming the boy was, quote, medically kidnapped by doctors and Child Protective Services. The protest culminated in the hospital having to go on lockdown for a couple of hours on March 15th, out of fear. They had to divert patients and they didn't allow visitors. 2 months later, in May of 2022, St. Luke's filed a lawsuit for defamation and several other claims, including invasion of privacy, against Bundy and his campaign and the People's Rights Network. Rodriguez and his Freedom Man Press and Political Action Committee were also named in that lawsuit. They claim there was a concerted effort to disrupt hospital business. False statements were made about CPS, and the hospital and its staff were attacked online. So St. Luke's wants the harassment to stop and to get the false and defamatory stuff posted online taken down, neither of which has happened. And that's why attorneys filed a motion for contempt back in February of this year. They're also asking for punitive damages of $7.5 million. Other than pleading guilty to the charge of trespass at St. Luke's Meridian, Bundy has refused to show up or take part in any of the proceedings related to this lawsuit. St. Luke's attorney Eric Stidham also says Bundy violated the judge's order not to harass St. Luke's and people connected to the lawsuit. So the judge ordered a civil warrant for his arrest yesterday, and Stidham asked for a default judgment in the case last week. So there's a lot to go through still. That's where we're going to bring in investigative reporter Morgan Romero. Now, we want to first understand what this warrant is about.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the last 48 hours,
Yes.
but we'll tackle that civil warrant first. You just touched on it. This civil warrant was not issued because Ammon Bundy refused to take part in the proceedings, refused to show up to court, refused to respond to anything regarding legal paperwork, right?
Gotcha.
This civil warrant was issued for charges of contempt of court. Again, you just touched on it. The judge saying Bundy is violating her orders. This is where sort of the civil case and a criminal case blur. That's according to the attorneys for St. Luke's. So, by the way, this is the fourth time that attorneys have brought up allegations of contempt in court with this case of St. Luke's versus Ammon Bundy. St. Luke's attorney Eric Stidham says the judge put an injunction and a protective order in place to stop Bundy, his People's Rights Network, and others from harassing, threatening, and intimidating potential witnesses for their lawsuit. But they have proof through Bundy's own statements that he continues to harass, threaten, and intimidate people. In court filings, Luke's says Bundy and his network encourage violence against their enemies, naming plaintiffs in the suit as their enemies, and they continue to make defamatory comments. So I talked to Stidham today. I also talked to Bundy over the phone for about half an hour earlier before talking to Stidham. Bundy told me, quote, he's sure that they want to destroy him. He says that he's also sure that they wanted it to get to the point where he would be arrested. Meantime, Stidham says this is the most movement the case has really gotten in several months over the past 48 hours.
The high points are the writ will be withdrawn. The sheriff has recommitted to his obligations regarding service. And we're waiting on some clarification on our motion for default. There are also a number of other issues in front of the court that she's considering including sanctions against Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Bundy. And we've also asked her to compel Mr. Bundy to appear at a deposition on behalf of some of these corporate entities that we believe are involved in the grift.
Would you say you wouldn't have to take all these steps if he would just comply from the outset?
Of course. We wouldn't have had to have taken all these steps but for Mr. Bundy's actions. And by the way, that includes not only not appearing in this case, but continuing to harass folks in violation of the judge's orders. So there's a myriad of reasons why Mr. Bundy needed to be served with process. Now, had he appeared or had he been willing to accept service, none of this would have been required.
Bundy told me in a phone call Thursday he's not showing up to hearings or responding because he can't afford to pay attorneys to represent him, and he can't defend himself against a powerful St. Luke's and their lawyers. Bundy feels the best way to, quote, logically mitigate damages is to allow them to get a quick default judgment, and he'll deal with the consequences. He thinks civil process servers would still come serve him if he chose to fight back. He says St. Luke's wants him to do something that'll be beneficial to them, which is for him to get upset. Bundy told me, quote, I gave them that, and I wish I wouldn't have, but it still doesn't change the fact that they're harassing me.
He asked, why would St. Luke's and its attorneys not file a default judgment from the beginning if that's what they ultimately wanted, was his assets and for him to pay up? Why not just do this from the beginning?
So broadly speaking, there's two reasons. One is procedural. Because of different steps that needed to be taken in the case regarding amendments, we were not able to move promptly to a default judgment. There's also, to be candid, strategic reasons. I mean, we believe, and we've alleged in our pleadings, that this is a grift. A tragic situation regarding this infant was used by Mr. Bundy and the others in order to raise money, feed the beast that is the People's Rights Network financially, get the publicity, drive up membership in People's Rights Network. We believe that that cynical grift is what's behind all of this. And then connected to now, we believe the reason Mr. Bundy didn't appear is because he doesn't want the hood opened up on how this operation works.
You want to unveil his finances so you can expose what this protest was really, you believe, about in the first place.
Yes. First, I want to make it clear, there were really significant damages, financial, that St. Luke's suffered because of this. We have an expert report that estimates the loss, immediate loss to St. Luke's. That includes lost patient visits, disruptions, security costs, at like $3.5 million. This was not a cost-free harassment. And then if you look at the ongoing security concerns for St. Luke's, the number of damages and costs to St. Luke's get in the tens of millions of dollars. And that's all been reviewed by an expert with serious scrutiny. There's no fluff in that. Those are real hard damages. Then you have the emotional damages of those affected and doxxed. I don't know how you put a price on that.
In a YouTube video Bundy posted right after our phone call Thursday, he pushed back against what Stidham just said.
Luke's, I get to speak my mind. I get to say what I want to. And I don't get to damage you, right? I don't get to damage you, but I get to say what I want, and that's exactly what I did. But you're using the courts to basically just destroy me because I spoke out bad against you. And you're lying. You're flat out lying, Chris Roth and Eric Stidham. You're saying that Diego and I did these things for gain, to get money and to get donations and to get subscribers. That's just such a bunch of garbage. It's a flat out lie, and you know it. There was only one thing that we were after. One thing. And that is to get that little baby back to his mother.
He also told me doxing the people involved in the Baby Cyrus case is the, quote, only accountability they get for taking babies from loving parents. Despite this lawsuit, Bundy says he'll continue to name names. And he says the Bible even encourages defamation. Meantime, Stidham says the judge has not ordered the default judgment that they've asked for yet, but if she does, she'd find Bundy in default, consider St. Luke's allegations true, and then schedule a hearing to determine damages. Stidham says they asked the judge to set a prompt hearing in Ada County where a jury hears the case. As far as the civil warrant goes, going back to what we talked about on the front end of this story, Bundy said in that YouTube video you just heard from today that he will not turn himself in. While there's no deadline to arrest him, Stidham believes the Gem County Sheriff will act on the warrant quickly. And Brian, we want to talk about how Bundy claims that he's not a violent person. He said this to me today. He has said this very openly to his followers in the People's Rights Network. He says that it's his constitutional right to express his free speech with those protests as well as online. It's his right to dox people, quite frankly, legally, to post their pictures and information. And when you reported a couple days ago that he told the Idaho Dispatch in an interview that he would meet anyone who shows up at his door to take his property with a shotgun, he told me it's his right to defend himself. So for that, and to provide some context, St. Luke's had some experts file these affidavits.
Okay.
And in these affidavits filed March 30th, they say that Bundy uses his platform, his People's Rights Network, to reach his followers and incites violence with his words that way and wants to get his followers to then kind of carry out those acts.
Ultimately, we don't normally hear from attorneys when it comes to lawsuits, civil or otherwise.
Right.
They're speaking out now because they just want word out. Is that how I understand it?
They do. I asked Stidham about that. He says St. Luke's is coming forward now because they feel they have to answer reporters' questions at this point. The legal proceedings are not cutting it, and verbatim, they claim telling the public what's going on with the lawsuit is their way of standing up for their employees, for their patients, and quite frankly, anybody who they say becomes a target of conflict entrepreneurs like Mr. Bundy.
All right. Well, it's a lot to digest there. Thank you very much, Morgan.
You bet.